Good morning, friends. Happy Wednesday. Today is day 23 of our study, and we are in Luke 14. Our sweet treat today is that Jesus is demanding. Probably not what you were expecting, but we'll get to this. All right, so in yesterday's text, we read that a group of Pharisees had warned Jesus that King Herod wanted him dead. And as we start out in chapter 14 today, we see another Pharisee has invited Jesus to dinner. Not all the Pharisees hated Jesus. Some were very curious about him. I'm sure some probably did feel a stirring in their hearts when he was near. And of course, there were many that still just wanted to trip him up. Verse 1 tells us that Jesus is dining with this group of Pharisees and they're watching him closely. In fact, the word there means they are scrutinizing him. They are just waiting to catch him up in something. Now, one of the dinner guests at the party is a man with what they called dropsy. This was a condition which made his whole body swell and be just abnormally puffy. And he was probably in a lot of great discomfort. Many Bible scholars speculate that he might have just been invited to this party simply to see if Jesus would heal him on the Sabbath. Knowing what these Pharisees were thinking, Jesus answers them with a question, asking, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Jesus knows it's unlawful to work on the Sabbath, but there's nothing that says it's unlawful to heal. And for Jesus, healing wasn't work. He simply needed to speak or touch or just think it, and it would happen. So he poses this question, and he wants to see what the Pharisees are going to say. Of course, the Pharisees all keep quiet. They have nothing to say in response to Jesus' question. So Jesus simply just heals the man. It says he touched him and let him go. Think of it. This man would have been so puffy and swollen and incredibly uncomfortable, and Jesus just heals him. So it would have been a complete physical change for this man. Such an amazing opportunity for them to witness firsthand this miraculous healing from Jesus. Jesus then looks at the crowd and asks another pointed question. He says, "If your donkey or ox fell into a pit and it was the Sabbath, which one of you wouldn't pull it up?" He's saying, of course you would. So here Jesus is asking this question, and the Pharisees can't answer because they know the answer. Jesus isn't using a parable or some other kind of spiritual explanation. He's using common sense and logic. And he's also paying them a compliment by insinuating that, of course, they're good, kind people and they would help their animals. There was no law against helping your animals on the Sabbath. And so Jesus is saying, it's okay with God for you to help your fellow man on the Sabbath if it's okay to help your animals. Now, I love watching historical fiction dramas on television or reading historical fiction novels. I love the old castles and the big dresses and the idea of royalty. In almost every era and in almost every country, there's always a very detailed seating arrangement for the meal. Men would escort women into the dining room in a certain order, and those in the highest honor were seated first in a higher place of honor at the table. What might have been the head of the table or a certain place in the middle of the table, or maybe closer to where the king sat if you were dining in a palace. So for centuries around the globe, where you sat during a meal had been very important. So we see here in chapter 14 that it's a big deal in Jesus' community as well. Jesus looks around the room and notices that people are strategically placing themselves at the highest places of honor. And so he decides this is another great teaching moment, and he offers up a parable. He says something like this: when you're invited to a wedding feast, the greatest social event of the year, don't sit in the highest seat of honor. How embarrassing would it be if you sat there and somebody even more important than you came in, and the person throwing the feast asked you to scoot down a seat so that other person could have your chair? That would bring so much shame upon you. Instead, sit at the lowest place. That way, when the other guests arrive and are milling around, and the person throwing the feast sees you in the lowest place, they will ask you to move up into a higher place. In other words, if you exalt yourself, you will be humbled. But if you humble yourself, you will be exalted. Even though we don't have the same kind of seating traditions that they did when Jesus walked the earth, I think we all understand this simple truth. It's better to be raised up because of your humility than to be knocked down because of your conceit. Then Jesus turns to the Pharisee who asked him to dine with him and says, when you give a big party like this, don't invite all your wealthy friends and family. You know they're just going to have another party just like it and invite you to that party, and it's just like you'll be paid back for your kindness. Instead, invite the poor, the blind, the lame, and those who cannot repay you, for you will be repaid by God the Father in eternity. I love the picture that's gone around social media for the last couple years that says, true integrity is doing something for someone knowing that they can never pay you back. And that is exactly what Jesus is saying here. He says, I'm so sorry. So after he says this, I have no idea why, unless it was to break the tension. Suddenly a man in the party shouts out, blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. But Jesus just continues his parable. Jesus says that a rich man was having a huge dinner party. He sent out his servant to invite his friends. And the first friend said, thanks, but no thanks. I have just bought some land and I need to go see it. So then the servant goes to the second man, and the second man says, thanks, but no thanks. I just bought a bunch of oxen and I need to test them out and see if they're strong. So then he goes to the third man, and the third man says, thanks, but no thanks. I just got married, so I kind of want to go be with my wife. So the servant comes back to his master and tells him all the excuses. And of course, the master is very upset. See, the first two men made excuses that were foolish. They had purchased material possessions sight unseen, and they were skipping out on the banquet to do something they should have already done. And then the third man was putting his family, his new wife, before the banquet. Now, obviously, in real life, our family should our family should come before some banquet from a friend. But obviously, Jesus isn't actually talking about a real banquet here, and we're going to get to that. Jesus goes on to say that the servant came home and gave these excuses to his master, and the master was so angry that he told his servant instead to go out and invite the poor and the lame and the blind. And when he had done that, the master was told by the servant, guess what? We brought in all those people and we still have room for more. And so the master said, great, go out to the highways and the hedges. Go pull up the drunks and the homeless and the less desirable people in our community and bring them in. He said, I want my house to be so full that when those foolish friends of mine hear about this party and how big it is, if they come to my door and they want in, I want there to be no room for them. You see, the man at the dinner party with Jesus had shouted out, blessed is he who shall eat the bread of the kingdom of God. But Jesus used this parable to ask the man, are you ready to receive my invitation? Do you have foolish excuses, or are you truly ready to receive? When Jesus finishes his meal, he continues down the road toward Jerusalem. He says to the crowd that's always following him, if you do not hate your parents, your spouses, your children, your siblings, and even your own life, you cannot follow me. You cannot be my disciple. Now, this was a completely audacious thing to say. Jesus was requiring complete and total devotion, unlike anyone had ever done before. If he wasn't God himself, this would have been complete idolatry, but Jesus is God himself, and it's not idolatry. He's not literally telling his followers that they should hate people. Now, remember, God's kingdom is built upon love. So he's really just speaking figuratively here, trying to show the contrast. If you love your friends and family, your love for Jesus must be so much more that the love for your family almost looks like hate compared to your love for God. Jesus goes on to say that whoever does not bear his cross and follow him cannot be his disciple. He wants them to know the same thing that he previously told the disciples that he had called earlier. He wants them to know that being a follower of Jesus comes with a price. We must die to ourselves. What I love here is that Jesus said, whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. his cross. Jesus didn't say my cross or the cross. He said we each have a unique and individual cross to bear. The cross you carry will look much different than mine, and the situation and circumstances around that cross will look different. So we cannot compare our crosses. We each have our own unique cross to bear. We do a disservice to people when we paint this rosy picture of butterflies and unicorns to people when we tell them about Jesus. We want so badly for them to be saved that we fail to tell them they must pick up their cross and follow him. Jesus, however, made it clear that following him is costly but worth it. Jesus wraps up this chapter asking the crowd, which one of you would build something or wage a war without first sitting down and calculating the cost? Jesus says you have to be all in if you want to follow me. You have to know what you're losing, but also what you're gaining. You must calculate that for yourself. Then he adds, salt is good, but if the salt has lost its flavor, what good is it? And the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him. I think too many times we underestimate God's ability to move in the hearts of men. I know I have done that far too many times. Jesus is asking us here, what good is a Christian who isn't all in? What good is salt if it isn't really salty? Jesus has just told these people the high price of following him. He's just told them that it's all or nothing. And the greatest sinners of all have stepped forward in this crowd, ready to follow him, while the lofty Pharisees and the lawyers, they're all standing in the back. Jesus just told them, you have to be willing to die to yourself. And these men, these great sinners, pushed forward. They pressed in. Today's sweet treat is that Jesus is demanding. We don't like that word. When it comes to people, being demanding is a very negative quality or trait. But when you're the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, it's essential. The price of following Jesus is very demanding. He demands our all. In return, he gives us his all. The trade is forever in our favor. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. As you think about the price of following Jesus, I just pray that you will remember the price that he paid for all of us and what that cost him. He calculated the cost first before he gave himself to us. And today we need to calculate the cost of following him. And when we weigh it on the scales, it is always in our favor. I hope you have a wonderful day today. God bless, and I'll see you tomorrow.